Horror storytelling comes in many shapes and forms. By its very nature, the intention is to shock, scare, or disturb you, the reader. And everyone fears different things though, and that's why the line between good and bad horror is often drawn so harshly, and changes depending on who you talk to. The Moving Finger by Stephen King is considered one of his scariest short stories, and personally, I think it's mildly amusing at best. I personally believe that the adaptation of another of King's short stories, 1408, is one of the best horror movies ever made, and yet most people either haven't seen it or barely remember it. The movie Psycho shocked adult audiences to the point of fatigue, and now it would bore even the youngest Fortnite kid. The point is, horror is one of the most divisive genres when it comes to storytelling and what is good versus what isn't. What stood the test of time and what didn't? What constitutes true fear or not? What is going to keep people shaking in their boots? It's nowhere more divisive than when discussing traditional printed horror books versus online horror short stories, otherwise known as creepypastas. And today, I want to talk about the balance of value when we compare these two mediums. What's shaking? My name's Cam, welcome back to another video. I make videos every single week on fantasy and horror books, so if that's your kind of thing, if you're a reader like myself, then stick around. Today I'm uploading from... Actually, don't worry about it. So it can be super easy to dismiss online horror as just trashy short stories. And I get it. I'm talking about the creepypastas, the Wattpad Horror, the YouTube storytelling videos that Corp's husband used to make before he could go viral for simply saying hello.
Hello. Oh my hi, Corpse.
These stories I'm talking about are usually only a couple of minutes long, usually told from a first-person perspective, and usually pitched as a true story. Sometimes it might be something supernatural and explicitly fictional, but other times they are true accounts, or supposedly so. And I think this is the most important distinction that you can make between online horror and horror books, or even published horror anthologies and collections. Printed horror is practically always presented as fiction, with clearly defined characters and situations and plot. Well, today I just felt like playing devil's advocate for a minute and chatting a bit about why I think that these two types of horror storytelling don't have to be as diametrically opposed as everyone seems to think. One of my favourite things to do while I work is throw on the headphones and play some short horror stories from YouTube. Creators like Rainbot, Mr. Baller, Scare Theatre, Mr. Nightmare, just to name a few. I definitely prefer the more realistic stories, the ones that focus a lot less on the paranormal and more on people doing various unhinged or abnormal things that usually end with violence. The thing is, I'm a pretty skeptical guy. I love paranormal horror, but it doesn't really scare me, or even creep me out most of the time. However, stories about neighbours that creep around your windows late at night, or Uber drivers that aren't what they seem, they all feel possible. Therein lies the beauty of this type of storytelling, especially when compared to printed horror. The very act of purchasing a horror book immediately convinces us that this is fiction, far removed from us, whereas a story from a stranger on the internet, maybe it happened, maybe it could happen to me. Now, with that said, creepypastas generally aren't a very profitable way to tell horror stories, and I'm not just talking about money. I don't think I could name one author or person directly responsible for providing any of these online horror stories, and I doubt any of them are making any real considerable money from them. I'm not talking about the YouTubers who read the stories out, by the way. I mean the actual writers or contributors, the people who put the pen to paper or keyboard. There's not much fame or fortune to be found in coming up with these short horror online stories. And no hate to those people, but I think that's fair. Only because as entertaining as these stories are when you listen to or read them, they usually aren't very original, or, and I'm not trying to be an arse here, but well written either. All of these Snapchat horror stories are pretty much the same from one to the next. The setup, the climax, and the resolution will almost always follow the exact same beats. Strange person adds you on Snapchat, they use it to stalk you, they get busted, the end. And it's pretty much the same for the other creepypastas as well. They're generally very familiar and haphazardly thrown together. But to be very clear, that's the charm. They usually feel like real stories from real people who just had to jump on the internet and tell everyone about this crazy thing that just happened to them. I love them, but mildly entertaining is really as far as it goes. Now, printed horror is a different story. It's very far departed from the online stories that we just talked about, to the point where them being classified as horror is really the only line that you can draw between the two. When a horror story is written with the purpose of a price tag and a pen name being attached, there comes an obligation, a requirement to be original, engaging, and terrifying in a way that creepypastas simply can't. Because we go into reading these books with an understanding that it's fiction and likely couldn't happen to us, the author now needs to make us scared less for ourselves and more for the characters. Where online horror shorts are a spike of spooky adrenaline, horror books are a long, winding roller coaster that doesn't just go up and down, but also levels out sometimes so that we can take a breath. While I will defend creepypastas as a lot more than just trash, I will always hold a lot more respect and reverence for the writers who take the time and the effort to craft an entirely original story, or at least attempt to. A story that asks for a bit more commitment and trust from the reader, more than just a couple of minutes of spare time. I love that both of these storytelling mediums exist though. It lets all kinds of people experience the fun and excitement of horror stories. People who aren't big readers can sit down and read a creepy story in the same time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. With that said, it does disappoint me sometimes when I see people come into reading horror books with the expectation that it's just scare, scare, scare. The time that horror authors have to take to make you care about the characters can seem boring if all you're used to is short, quick creepypastas, and that's a shame. Thanks to the online horror storytellers, we have Slenderman, the Russian sleep experiment, Lavender Town syndrome. But if you're ever in the mood for something that might really sit with you longer than you'd expect, and truly disturb you in a way that these online stories can't, there's lots of great authors out there for you to check out. I'd recommend Joe Hill, Junji Ito, any of the Books of Blood by Clive Barker. Hell, you might even like some of the authors that I've had the pleasure of working with in some short story anthologies. But what do you think? What do you think of creepypastas and online horror? Do you like those and horror books, or just one or the other? Are you one of those people who can't stand the creepypastas and think they're just complete garbage? I'd love to hear it. Thank you so much for watching, especially for watching through the whole video. You are my favorite. I have videos every single week on fantasy and horror books, so if that's your kind of thing, stick around. Otherwise, thank you again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Catch ya.